Sweet. All right, welcome to round 7 of the championships. Congratulations for both teams for making it this far. The info slide today is there are legal rules that limit how law enforcement may obtain evidence, such as requirements to obtain a search warrant before conducting searches of a property, prohibiting certain types of surveillance, or requiring police officers to be able to justify conducting a search of someone's person. Evidence gathered in breach of these rules is considered improperly obtained and is generally inadmissible in court. However, in many countries, courts may still allow such evidence in circumstances where a serious crime is alleged, and excluding the evidence would significantly harm the prosecution's case. Therefore, the motion today is this House believes that the court should never allow improperly obtained evidence to be used in criminal trials. Speaker times are 8 minutes with POIs 1 to 7, so that's 1 clap at 1 minute, 1 clap at 7 minutes, and 2 claps at 8 minutes. Replies are 4 minutes with 1 clap at 3 minutes and 2 claps at 4 minutes. Without further ado, I invite first Ash to start the team.
The law is an inviolable part of our society that needs to be upheld to its utmost, lest society lose trust in the government and its laws. The police are the ultimate arbiters of justice in our society and are looked up to as a sign of justice and peace, and we want it to stay this way. By allowing the police to break the law and still use this evidence in court, we are breaching the trust of the public has in the justice system. The law states, as said in the info slide, that this is illegal and it is against the law to do these kinds of things, and we should not allow, we believe we should not allow this information to be used, as it is not obtained properly, it is not obtained by the law, just as anything else obtained illegally is not allowed. We should not allow evidence that is obtained illegally to be used either. So to show this, I'm going to use 2 major points. I'm going to show you why this incentivizes police to break the law and it gives them more power than they should have. And this also increases the public's, the control of the government over the public. So, this is against the law, and we don't want to break the law because this goes against what people want. People want the law to be a thing which they can rely on.
POI?
Not right now. So, when a police officer has this illegally obtained evidence, they can use it in court. So, when they break the law to do this, they are breaching what they're... When this is used in court, the police officer is still breaking the law, yet they are incentivized to do this because it can allow them to fulfill what they want to do and put people behind bars without following due process. Due process is important in this as it allows people to know when they are safe and to know that the government is not spying on them as increased surveillance. And by allowing this information to be used, it incentivizes the government to create programs to spy on people like this, to create the ability to have this kind of surveillance, and it encourages police officers to take part in illegal searches if they believe that it can help their cases. This is something we do not want, as we lose public safety and we lose trust in the institutions that we rely on. So, I'll take a POI before I move on.
Do you believe that citizens want police to follow the law at the expense of guilty people remaining on the street?
They wish to have it so that police aren't breaking the law in any case, because we don't want the law to be broken. The police become the guilty party in this. And also, this isn't going to help very much. A warrant is something that is obtained for a reason. It's also about the risk of the police officers taking this action. It is there so that these powers of the police and the powers of the state are used at the correct times. If we are rewarding the police, we are rewarding this behavior by allowing them to use this evidence. What this does is it creates a very bad precedent that they can break the law for their own benefit, while the common people cannot do the same. So this gives the police more power, which then they can then use. So, police officers are known to be very prejudiced against specific groups, often racially against Māori or African American groups. So, giving the police extra power to put these searches, it means that if they unlawfully do something, they can find someone that they don't like, that they don't want to do anything. They can then prosecute them and have an argument further against them. This is something that we do not want, as we don't want this prejudice and stuff to bleed through, and we do not want this prejudice them to hold these things which are more dangerous, which are more violent, these things that come from it being not done in proper process. And so why does it really matter that police can do this? It is because the rules and regulations are there to make sure that the power of the state and the power of the police are in balance with the rights of the people. By circumnavigating this and allowing this evidence to be used, the government now has an avenue to be able to illegally go against what it has stated it will not do and use this as a potential bad actor to put either innocent people in jail or people through breaking this system. And so this is government overreach in this industry, and it pushes through so that the government has more control over its people. There is more fear as the government can constantly be surveilling and without us knowing, and things like this where it is very hard to hold accountable. And now moving on to another point where it is harder to prosecute in these cases. A police officer who does this is then, and this evidence is used in court to show a case that someone is guilty, it is very hard to prosecute this police officer as they have done the right, could have been seen to have done by a jury to do the right thing, which incentivizes them further to keep breaking this if they believe that they are right, which is something that they shouldn't do, and we should be going off the traditional systems of warrants where it is decided if it's right. It should not be the individual officer's judgment on this. It should be the judgment of the courts and the judgment of the systems. So, why is it important to have these systems? It is to make sure that we are following the procedure, the public knows their rights, and the public knows when and where they are being surveilled, and what the police can do. By doing this, even if some of the police officers are good actors, there will be people who will abuse this potentially to go against people that they think are guilty, and to show these things where it can be bad and risky. For example, if a police officer was to decide to raid a place or to not get a warrant to search and immediately shows up without a warrant and without a plan, it lacks a paper trail of anything showing this. So there is far less evidence of this event occurring, and there is far less support available, and there is far less information about this for if it comes to court and for what happens during this. If a police officer did not get a warrant and did not get a thing, it should not work, because the police officer cannot be properly prosecuted due to the nature of them potentially acting in the greater good in their beliefs. So we should be working on a way which we can push through and have our system work properly the way it was intended and the way it was created legally, so that we do not have conflicting morals and conflicting opinions within our police force. So, what has this majorly shown? This has shown that the police gain extra power through this that is potentially used in prejudiced ways and in ways that are very negative towards the general public and create fear and anxiety and panic in the public against the government and against the police and individual police officers. It shows that it's setting a bad precedent of the government overstepping its common boundaries and going against the law, which is one of the things which we do not want. Even if it is illegal for these police officers to do this, then they are very hard to prosecute, as currently it is very hard to prosecute an individual officer for doing something wrong. But adding this in makes it extremely difficult, is because they can be seen as doing something right. They can be seen as doing something the right way, when in reality they are breaking the procedures, they are breaking these things. They can be encouraged to do this. And this is something that we do not want, as we want them to follow this, as this is what is stated to the citizens and what the citizens can do. So it is very important for us to follow that to the letter. So, the main impact of this is fear on the public, which we do not want because it creates anxiety and lack of trust in the government. If there were issues to occur, it means the government can push further than they should and increase their power over the citizens. The importance of freedom and civil liberties in this case is very important, so there should be weighed quite highly that the government is overstepping its pre-designated bounds and going into an area where they exert far more control in this legal process than the public, and this is why we should not allow this evidence to be used in court. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the next speaker to come and start the King's case.
A white police officer is wandering the street. He sees a white man and thinks, I don't know what it is. That guy just feels a little shady. He can't justify why, just has instincts. He pats this man down, and in the back pocket, he finds a bloody knife. DNA evidence reveals that this knife was used to kill someone's child. But since this evidence was improperly obtained, because it was not justified, this means, and is the only evidence which can swing the case into the verdict which would lead this man being convicted, the opposition would have you believe that it is better morally for this person to not be convicted. It is better for this person to wander the streets and have the chance to kill someone else, despite this evidence being the thing which could link them to a murder. It could make this person not be on the streets anymore. It could make this person not be able to ruin another person's life. It could make this person the justice they deserve, and the opposition will not have that. So, three things for you, this speech. Firstly, on setup, secondly, on rebuttal, and thirdly, on criminal justice, which we believe to be the most important thing throughout this debate. Okay, in terms of setup. So, what does this look like? So we believe that improper evidence should be used only when it is a significant piece of evidence which can be proven to be otherwise correlated to the trial. It is when there is a serious crime alleged, so we see this to be things such as murder, rape, abuse, or abductions, as well. And also, as another important point of clarification, we see that when this improper evidence is obtained, we are not saying that there should be no consequences for the officer. Yes, there should be consequences when someone does something illegal. We're never saying that there should never be consequences when someone does something illegal. This could look like demotion, suspension, or internal affairs investigations into their conduct. But, however, we're also not saying that this evidence should not be able to be used in order to get the convictions, when that is what the victim deserves. The victim deserves to be able to get the justice. The victim deserves to have their offender go into prison. The victim deserves for the consequences of the actions of the offender to have an impact. So, at first, you talked a lot about how this incentivizes police to break the law, which they are so sworn to uphold. We recognise that police do break the law, but we do not see this as being an additional incentive for them to break the law, because as we said, consequences exist within the status quo, and consequences continue to exist regardless of whether we allow people to this is evidence to use. This is not a further incentive for them to break the law, because there are consequences. They are putting their career on the line. So people are going to do it regardless or not. People are going to do these legal actions. Now, how do we win this debate? We win this debate by showing you that there exists in the case that justifies the that uses evidence, the rewards that we get for the conviction that it will obtain, justifies this use of some of the illegal methods, which we have shown will occur regardless of whether or not this evidence can be used. You also talked a lot about how the police gain power. Again, this just isn't true, because we are showing that there are these consequences of prejudice, there are consequences over 7 bounds, but there's not been that a victim, their murderer should not be convicted for their actions. So onto our main point on criminal justice. So we recognise that there are cases where there are insufficient evidences are required to get a conviction, where a serious crime has been committed, such as again, rape, murder, kidnapping, child abuse, and the only evidence that they have has been technically improperly obtained.
You're right.
No, thank you, and has been crucial to the conviction of the murder. For example, there's the person who had the bloody knife I talked about earlier, where that bloody knife is the only thing linking conclusively linking them to the murder, and that is the single most important piece of evidence trial. So, in our model, we see that this evidence should be allowed to be used. There will be consequences for the person who did this illegal pat down, but because it was unjustified. But they still say this evidence should be allowed to use. So, this evidence is the only thing that can be used to link them to crime. How does this influence the justice process? So, case 1, in which we don't allow it to be used. The jury would be otherwise unconvinced of the offender's guilt. The jury shows it's not guilty, and furthermore, that means that the victim runs free. He goes scot-free, runs on the street. This rapist or murderer is returned to the streets. Alternatively, in our world, we see that the jury can be convinced by this evidence being allowed. We see this evidence is significant enough to flip the outcome, and the offender gets convicted. And before I move on to my next mechanism, I will take a POI.
Do you think Maori people deserve to be treated poorly by the police because they're allowed to, with the justification that they had a bad vibe about them and found a bloody knife in their
We have never said that it was okay. I've only been saying that it's not okay to be done, but we're saying that if it is done and it finds this evidence, we should not discount this evidence just because of the fact that the person who did it had bad vibes. The evidence should still count. It's just there'll be consequences for the person who did it as well. And moving on to the mechanism. So people could be. We also say that people will be further disadvantaged from crime when we see this in the status quo. This means that people have realised that they have a greater chance of being convicted of crime. It means that people are more afraid of getting caught, which means people are less likely to commit crime, which means that people commit less of these serious crimes. So again, we're seeing less murders, we're seeing less rapists, we're seeing less abusers. And people are further incentivized, so victims are further incentivized to pursue these cases as serious crimes. For example, if you have a rape victim and they've just been told that the only piece of evidence that's linking their rapist is something that's insufficient. We see that in our world, we can use this evidence, this evidence can be permitted to, in such a way that it can be used to convict this rapist. And as such, we see this as ultimately a really, really positive outcome, because even if we get only just 20 less rapists on the street, there's 20 less families that can be broken, there's 20 less people that can be harmed. There's just all these people who are getting the justice they deserve. The victim gets the justice that they deserve, and that's hugely beneficial for the mental health of the victim, because this victim no longer has to be afraid waking up every morning that their rapist is still on the streets. This victim just doesn't have to wake up knowing that this person who hurt me, the person who could hurt other people, is still out there. They know that the rapist is securely in a jail cell. They know that a murderer is still in the jail cell, and that murderer can't kill more people. This murder can't ruin more families. And this is just ultimately the single most important outcome that we see from this debate. We see that this, the justice being delivered to the justice being delivered to these offenders is more important than any possible moral qualms that you come up with on your side of the house, which is really the only thing that you have. Because often in your world, victims are powerless in knowing that the offender has escaped due to this improperly gathered evidence. This could send the victim into a deep spiral of depression. This could leave them having suicidal tendencies because they know that it could have been convicted. They know the murderer or the rapist or the abuser, they could have been sent to jail, but because of this the evidence being improperly obtained, there's clear evidence which links them to the crime. We see that it's always so much better just to get the benefits of having one less rapist in the streets. If the opposition wants to tell us that they want a rapist on the street, then that is what they're allowing in their world. So ultimately, what do we see? We see a world in which we have less harmful people on the streets. We see a world in which we have better justice outcomes for victims. We see a world where victim mental health is better. We see a world in which it is justified in using evidence, where there are still consequences for how they obtain the evidence for breaking the law, which the opposition is trying to have us believe that we won't do that. But we see that it's ultimately still justified in using this evidence as a whole, and that is why we will win this debate. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for this speech and invite the next speaker to come and continue.
Starting my speech in 3, 2. I think it's unclear the scale and severity of the harms that they try to present against our certain harms that are going to affect every single person within society. Okay then, I'm going to start first on setup, then I'm going to address their point on justice. Note though that I think we probably cop, and we're okay to cop, that we might get a couple of less criminals convicted. But we also think that this is nowhere near the scale of harm that we can prove when we get more criminal activity, and that criminal activity is performed by the people who enforce the laws, like the police officers, who are obviously going to have more scope to be able to enact that harm. Then I'm going to move on to our 4 positive pushes. I'm going to extend on all of them and explain why the fact they haven't been rebutted means that we must win those, that we win all of those points, and those are easily enough to explain no matter how much they expand on justice, because justice is capped. Okay then, on to addressing their setup. Most of the thing can be just explained about how this is a beliefs model, it's not a policy model, they don't have fiat. We think that our proof that we give at Michael are mechanisms for why we're probably going to see that world in which the police officers do end up having more and more power, they do get away with it, is pretty clear, but I think I'm going to expand on it anyway because I think it's important. I think when you have a world where you see a bunch of police officers in the news get arrested for arresting somebody, for arresting someone, even though it ended up meaning that you got another rapist off the street, is probably a world in which the public gets really, really annoyed. I think that they tell the government, they lobby the government, they say, we don't like this, we think police officer Constable Steve probably shouldn't be in prison for arresting and finding a knife on someone who should have been arrested. We think, therefore, there's going to be massive public backlash, and the government is probably going to accept that it is by far the best world for them if they say that, okay, we're not going to have harms, we're not going to lock up this police officer if this happens. We think we also gave more mechanisms at Michael. We think even in the case that they do for some reason still get arrested, even though they managed to have a positive contribution on society as they're trying to claim, I think even in those cases we still are going to have police constables being the vigilante, going really crazy, trying to arrest a bunch of people because they want their lucky break. They know, as I'll go into later, that Māori and lower minority people are unlikely to report them because of systemic issues, so they're probably going to get away with it scot-free, and the decision calculus is going to be relatively obvious because the benefits that they get are going to be so massive. They are seen as a hero, they get a massive promotion, they get massively in the news if they get it right, and if they get it wrong, well, they're probably not going to be reported on because this person is just a minority, they don't trust the state, they're not going to report. I think then, if there are still going to be, I've covered that. Okay then, onto their main push about justice and how there's going to be less criminal activity. We think we probably agree that there are going to be more people arrested, but we also are unsure about the scope of that. We think that in the majority of cases, it's relatively easy to achieve a warrant, it's relatively easy to get to the point where you are able to arrest them. We think that the only example they give where you would be able to arrest someone under their world, but not under ours, is an example of just having a bad vibe of someone. We think that's really, really hard to actually hone in on. We think this vibe is right in such a small amount of cases that if they are right and the police constable isn't going to risk just doing it on everyone, they're probably not going to do it risk on vibe alone, which means that the benefit they get is really, really small because they only get benefits in a very small amount of situations where, A, this police officer was actually right, and B, there was no way to be able to access this information through legal methods, which, note, in most countries are going to be relatively easy to get information through, because if they weren't, then the country would probably change their laws because they don't want to see more criminals out on the street. So if it was really hard to get a warrant, they would probably make it easier because they don't want to see a bunch of criminals out of, on the street. We also here, the only other push apart from just less criminal activity, and I think it was impacting of the less criminal activity, is the victim spirals we have when people know that their offender is out on the street. We think this only applies to certain cases because in most cases, if you have are able there to do eyewitness testimony, if you are 100% sure you're right, generally those cases are going to be cases in which you have other evidence that you can use. So we think most of these cases are big cases as they defined, murder, where you probably aren't actually going to be able to you aren't going to have anyone have a negative impact. The person who has a negative impact of knowing their offender is still out on the street is already dead, so therefore we don't think this applies much. But we also think that the depression of a couple of individuals who are victims should be way, way lower than the depression of everybody when they know that they live in a society in which they have police constantly breathing down their neck, and as we've explained, they feel like they can do anything. Okay then, on to our positive pushes, and our main one is going to be racism and prejudice, because I don't think we focused on it as much as Michael, and I think it's really important. I'm going to start with a characterisation of police constables as prejudiced and explain why they are. Firstly, they have a power complex. We think that police officers who go into that role because they want to persecute the victims, because they want to be that big hero leader who are the top of their village and they're saving the justice for their community. We think, therefore, at that point, they feel like they're above everybody. They are the enforcers of the rules. They also, this means that they find it okay, probably, if they are going to persecute someone because they don't don't care that much about them, because while they care about the community as a collective, because they feel like they're above anyone, they don't have that same empathy of people on an individual level, especially if they're already prejudiced to think they're probably criminal. We think everyone's inherently prejudiced at some level, but this is only expounded because they're probably not going to be persecuted for it, because minorities don't feel like they're able to tell the state that the police officer did something bad, because if the minority has had experiences of the state not listening to them, of the police officers sweeping it under the rug, and of bad things happening when they speak out, therefore they're probably getting away with scot-free. And we also think that police officers are naturally people who haven't experienced prejudice in the past, meaning that they can't or don't have empathy for the people who do experience prejudice reasonably obviously. Okay then, what's the impacts of police targeting specifically minorities that are prejudiced before? But before I talk about impacts, I've got to take a POI because I'm running out of time.
Do you recognise that within the status quo there are in fact serious consequences for improper conduct that are handled internally?
Improper, yes I do, but I think the reason that is the case is because the public doesn't see the benefits of them in court, so they've got no reason to lobby governments, as I've already mechanised. I think then, what are the impacts of police targeting specifically minorities? I think this creates a really bad power complex within the communities, because the people they see being arrested are the people who are minorities, which means that they extrapolate that onto the force of other minorities. We think they also obviously has really terrible effects for all the minorities out in the street who are now being continuing more and more harassment from the police officers. The more power they have, the more that's going to compound, the more they feel like they're better than this person, so the more they're going to abuse that power, so it's just going to get worse and worse over time. I think also, as it hasn't been responded to, I didn't talk about it that much, but I'm just going to again talk about how we've already given you these points on less public trust in the system. They don't trust the police constables to do their job. We've already given you this point, as I just talked about how people in minorities are going to face more prejudice, and they're also going to feel more at the whim of the state. We've talked about how there's going to be significantly less public safety, because the police are going to be using their powers in a way that abuses those powers, so it's worse for people. Therefore, at this point of the debate, what do you have to believe? I think you have to believe that their side of the house is probably going to arrest a few more people that they wouldn't have arrested otherwise. But we think our side of the house, their side of the house also has more criminals because the police officers turn bad, and we think our side of the house has way more scale because it affects literally everybody, literally everybody's worried, literally everybody's stressed, and they probably commit more crime because of it. Thank you so much.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the next speaker to comment.
Did you hear that someone's stolen all the toilets in the police station? The police have nothing to go on. 5 things I'm going to do for you in the speech. First of all, a little clarification over our framing of the world. Secondly, 3 things. First, on impacts of this, introducing this. Secondly, on the impacts on victims, and finally on trust in the system, and then moving on to my second substantive point, which is mechanising why police brutality isn't going to increase under this regime. So first of all, a little thing about our setup. Consequences are going to exist for police officers who do this, but only if the evidence isn't used in court as valid and necessary like that. We think it's important to note that it is quite a serious thing for a police officer to, use this new ability, but they're going to do it if they think it's the right thing to do and that it's going to be useful in a court case. All right, now moving on to whether this is actually going to be an effective thing. So we've heard from the affirmative team that this is not going to do anything. There's not really any situations where this is going to be helpful. No. So we tell you there might be some situations where it might be hard to get a warrant because you're in a situation you need to search it and leave there or die, or maybe your evidence is going to go away soon. We especially see maybe this is true in, for instance, a rape case where this happens and then there's very little evidence of the crime afterwards. But obviously, even if you don't buy that, the fact that this is in the mood and implies there must be some kind of change occurring in order for this to be an actual debate. Right, so moving on to impacts on victims. We see that under this, we see that people are more likely to feel like if they bring a case to court, then maybe it could be won, especially when we talk about these crimes where they're very serious, so there's serious impacts on victims, and also it was going to be hard to prove without this evidence. Whereas we see that making this change allows people to feel like they have the confidence to bring it to court. Now, why is this important? This is important because we see, like in a lot of cases, for instance, if someone's committed a crime a few times, like abuse or rape, we see that people might be scared to bring this to court. Because like, obviously this is a huge commitment, this is a large amount of money, this is so much emotional turmoil because you're having to relive this crime. Like, how unfair is that? And if someone doesn't think they're going to win the case, why would they bring it to court? And so then you might have someone who's like left a trail of 10 victims in their wake and only one of them's feels like they can stand up. Whereas if we have more people willing to stand up for because they feel like there's a better chance of justice, even if like the first one or two the conclusion is not guilty, if we have like more people coming in, we see the courts are going to start taking it more and more seriously when there's all these allegations. And so basically we just see, as we proved to you at first, it's easier to come to a decision and prove a crime for some of these, and therefore we believe that people are more likely to want to take it to court. And also moving on to the mental health of vulnerable people. Now let me clear this up. Like, these are serious crimes, these are horrible crimes, these are crimes we can't even consider the impacts it would have on you. These people, they want closure, they want safety, they don't want to feel like they know that their victim is still wandering around the streets, could do it again. They don't want to have to feel like they can have to move away from their city, away from their family and friends, just to be safe from this person, because the only evidence that that the police had just managed to get wasn't good enough to be in court. And even we know that even if this happens to just a few more victims, you should weigh this really highly, because these are people who have experienced some of the most horrible things a human can experience, and they deserve better. I'll take a POI.
Rape cases are famously almost impossible to gain conclusive evidence. What is it in your world that these police officers are able to find that they aren't in our world?
I'm not sure that's something that maybe we should be going into the exact mechanisms of right here, right now, but I do feel like the fact that you're struggling to find conclusive evidence for these serious crimes could also be due to the laws that prevent some evidence from being called conclusive. So I definitely would feel that there are situations where police haven't been able to obtain like a warrant for something, or like got a certain amount of police, but they can try and get evidence. So moving on to the trust in police. This is something that the negating team seems to be really concerned about. They're worried that people are going to be under the impression that they're going to be really police are going to be searching whenever they want to. And there's going to be a lack of public trust in the police. And what's more, frustration if police are being prosecuted but actually manage to prosecute someone with the evidence. Well, first of all, that's not what's going to happen under our model. If the police manage to prove someone guilty, they're not going to end up going to jail. That was just like a misunderstanding. But this actually really brings me on quite well to my substantive point about how police brutality isn't going to exist. So, first of all, the situations where this evidence can be used are extremely rare. Like, if you think about the model, it said serious crimes. Think about how often serious crimes are going to be occurring. Like, that's not too much, right? So if police are wanting to fabricate a case or just wave this power around, they're going to really struggle to find a window in which to do that. Furthermore, we've told you that the evidence has to line up with other evidence that's present. So, the police would have to, if they want to fabricate someone and be like, oh, you're guilty, they'd have to, have them in the right spot at the right time and somehow manage to get around all these other restrictions in order to make that serious crime, by the way, look like it's occurred. I don't see how there's an incentive for police to do this. They're not going to weigh their petty will or petty vengeance highly against the chance of serious consequences, because accusing someone of a crime they didn't do and fabricating it is going to invoke serious punishment. So it's seriously unlikely that police are going to be able to pull off framing or abusing the power, so they're not going to do it.
If your benefits are accrued in an environment where it's really hard to get evidence that often is effective in a case like a warrant, why isn't there going to be public backlash that means that law has changed?
I'm sorry, I'm tired. I didn't really understand that. But we've clearly mechanised to you that there's not going to be public backlash because the police are happy that people, you know, rapists aren't going to be walking around our streets. I feel like the public are going to feel safer, and that could actually increase trust in the police. So, we also see that F admitted it's currently hard to stop police officers from kind of abusing their power, especially racially. And so we see that with the fact that it's so hard to invoke this power wrongly for the police, we see that the police aren't going to be using this to increase our systemic, what's it called, racism within the police. Like, the people in the police force who are already being horrible to like Māori, African American democrats are the people who are going to be doing this anyway. And so they're not going to be using this power, which is like a limited case power that's hard for them to use wrongly, to do that. So when we look at this at the end, we see that a vulnerable group of people, victims of these crimes, are so much better off in our side of the house because they've got closure, because they've been helped. And we also see that this is not going to break trust in police. Actually, it's going to affirm people's trust that the police actually have power, which you'll notice quite a significant like rhetoric we see these days, that, oh, the police can't really do anything, why would I call the police? So this will actually encourage people, the police can do something. And this is especially important for serious crimes. As we've told you, they're so horrible to people, it's so important that they stop. I'm done with get me down from there. I'm sorry.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the next speaker to come up and continue their team's case.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think throughout this debate, the only thing the affirming team does, or the negating team does, is prove to you that a small amount of criminals are now going to be convicted at a higher degree because the police can illegally get information regarding them to convict them. I think what they needed to do to win this debate is prove to you that the authoritarian, like, the negative benefits you accrue from like the authoritarian regime that is going to be ushered in by allowing police to have this power is not going to outweigh this. I think it is going to outweigh this. Because of this, I think we are able to win this debate. All right, I think there's two main points of clash throughout this. Why does allowing the improper obtained info in trials create more crime, and why is not letting police use this improper evidence going to benefit society? All right, starting out, we've told you like about this creating more crime point. I think we've told you pretty sufficiently that if we're allowing police to like use evidence that's not legally obtained, they're going to be using evidence and like obtaining it in ways that are not like abiding by the law. I think what this looks like is you're allowing more, like you're incentivizing police officers to go to like different means to achieve this sort of like evidence so they can convict criminals. I think like taking the negating team at their like best case, we're going to get police officers doing this, and the police officers are going to get some more information about like rape cases, about some murder cases. You're going to solve maybe a couple more cases. The opposing team, they haven't given you any scale about this. I don't think you can buy that it's going to be very important because of this. They haven't really actually detailed why. I think it's too late in this debate for them to come back on this. There's nothing they can really do about that. Because of this, I think the fact this is such a like low-weighing thing in this debate means that the authoritarian and like power trip things that the police are going to gain by gaining like this allowed power to be able to like, you know, just illegally search for evidence is going to be the major like effect of like having this allowed in society. I think like by doing this, you're going to like promote this like authoritarian regime almost, because police are now like on this power trip. I think police officers, the fact that they can like illegally obtain this information to like convict criminals, like the only thing the opposing team has told you they're going to like the only way the opposing team has told you they're going to find these criminals who wouldn't be previously found is off like bad vibes if they see someone on the street. I think because of this, it's not likely that it's going to be used in many amazing like scenarios. It's not going to be very important. As well as this, I think the fact that like police officers, they're more incentivized to like go towards other means to obtain this information. There's a likelihood that these means are going to be like pretty criminal. They're not going to be abiding by the law because of this. I think this is going to be creating more crime, but on the other side of the spectrum within the police force. I think like the amount of crime that you get rid of by like introducing this sort of thing is going to like just be heavily outweighed by the fact you're allowing the police force to gain like this unlawful power, which is going to go against the civil liberties of people. You're going to have like Palantir drones in the next 10, 20 years because of what you're allowing here. It's just going to have such like so many negative benefits for society are going to accrue. You're going to have such like worse crime. In this case, it's going to be like of the police force because they're using like these bad means to obtain information. I think this is like just so much outweighing the small benefits you get on the other side of the house because of this. I think we can win on this since we're showing you that we're going to have much more crime due to the fact police officers are going to like different means in order to obtain the information. Due to this, I think we can win on this point. All right, I'll take the point of information.
Considering allowing this evidence to be used in some cases is the status quo in some countries, where exactly is this authoritarian regime that claims to exist?
I think the fact that you're allowing every country and like promoting it for every country now to use this, I think because of that, like inherently police officers are going to be able to go on this power trip. I think like most countries already that have this sort of like system in place where you can illegally obtain this evidence are countries like Russia, countries that like don't really have a stable democracy that's like truly the will of the people. Because of this, I think moving towards a government like Russia is probably not good for a democratic country. I don't think you're really going to gain much on their side of the house if you're allowing this to happen. I think the crime and the negative benefits are going to accrue. I think we win on this point. It's very important. All right, now why does this like affect society? I think like overall, what I've told you previously kind of applies to this because by allowing like these police officers largely to like exploit the evidence, like exploit the ways in which they can obtain evidence, I think you're going to see them like using all these different ways to get it, and I think that's going to like promote overall crime syndicates in this world. But I think this is largely because like you've got police officers and you've got like these big mafia bosses or whatever. The police officers are going to go to whichever means they can to get this evidence. I think police officers, you could see them going to like unlawful means, such as like going to crime syndicates in order to get information about criminals so they can convict someone. I think like the incentive that police officers now have to do whatever is in their power to convict someone, no matter if they are guilty or not, is going to like just be so detrimental for society. I think this is largely because like the police officers, they're able to like have this power trip. It's going to be like extremely detrimental because you've now got this sort of thing where they can go and like they can find someone on the street like the opposing team said, which they think has bad vibes. They don't even like, in this case, we don't even like as Michael had mentioned previously, you're not going to have like a paper trail behind what someone's done. There's nothing that's going to like actually prove that they have or haven't done, or like where this evidence has come from. Because of this, I think you could see like police officers fabricating information. This is going to be like extremely detrimental. Like as we previously mentioned, I think this majorly functions responsibly because we've previously mentioned it, but I think you can see officers, like police officers, they can go to like different means in order to find this type of thing, and then they can like find this type of thing and like see like minority groups that they like have like a vested interest to like convict. They can use this information that they've like obtained through the paper trails in order to like paper trails. There's nothing like left behind for like to follow to see if the evidence is good or not. I think because of that, you could see like more false convictions. This is going to be like really detrimental towards society. You're going to have more people going to jail. I think the fact that the only benefit the opposing side of the house can accrue is the fact you get a small amount, like more of criminals that are actually guilty going to jail. I don't think you can like weigh this highly in the debate because of the countless negative effects you're gaining by allowing like this power trip of police officers. I think because of this, it's just like heavily outweighed in this debate, and I think like the way we're winning this is just by basically showing you that these benefits the opposing side is trying to claim just cannot and will not outweigh the fact you're going to gain police officers that now can go on like power trips. They've got more authoritarian power. It's going to allow them to like more aptly like convict people falsely. You're going to have like more false convictions. Overall, you're going to have like a less effective crime or like justice system. This is going to be like horrible for society. It's going to make it so like society overall, it's going to be less justice. There's going to be like this more authoritarianism like thing that's like rising within the society. Because of this, I think it's like heavily benefiting it by not allowing this to happen. I think you're avoiding all the negative the negative effects that accrue on the other side of the house compared to our side of the house, where we get so many more positive things as we are not allowing like this thing to happen. Because of this, very proud to affirm.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the next speaker to come up and continue their team's case.
To begin my case, I'd like to start with an example that did actually happen in a real case. It will be a bit gory and a bit violent, however, this is a real case and this is the real world that we're talking about. Police find a woman stuffed in a jar. She has been raped and she is dying. They have no warrant to search the property in which they are searching. Therefore, finding this woman dying in a barrel is not evidence. This is what my second has tried to clarify. When we say evidence, we are talking mostly about cases in which you must act very, very quickly and there is not time to secure a warrant. However, the evidence that is found on arriving at the scene is incredibly, incredibly significant and should be considered within part of the case. So first over, I'd like to for the material that I'm going to cover, I'm going to be talking about what do our stakeholders want, which is going to be the citizens and it's going to be our victims. What gets more guilty convictions and what do we see as that good for society? Will police brutality increase, which is a high point of contention within this debate? And just a small thing of what this evidence may look like if I have time, even though I believe I've already cleaned that up a little bit. So we've identified the main stakeholders within this debate to be the citizens who are currently living under the regime of the police within our society, and the victims of these cases. What the other team has tried to prove time and time again is that this is bad for the citizens because they feel as though they can no longer trust police and that police brutality will increase. However, unfortunately, we do live in the real world where police brutality is rampant. We live in New Zealand, where police brutality against Pacific Māori people is so incredibly high. We can recognize this on both sides of the house. However, we can recognize that this police brutality does exist within our current system. What the other team will have you buy into is the idea that police brutality does not exist to such an extreme within our current system. However, it would exist within the system that we have. We find this very hard to believe because we see within our system that the police are able to search Pacific Māori people whenever they want for whatever reason to make them part of a database at any given point. We don't see that there is not an incentive to commit any form of police brutality on your side of the house that does not exist on our side of the house. Same thing for the inverse. There is no greater incentive on our side of the house than there is on your side of the house. You may argue that police want to be the hero, however doing the job of a policeman accurately is being a hero in some form or way. What we see on our side of the house is that we believe that yes, some cops are just incredibly prejudiced and are bad people and maybe do not understand systemic injustice. However, we believe that the system in which we currently live currently just glazes over all of that and does not care. So we believe that we see that any police officer who is likely to succumb to police brutality and succumb to police violence and going against these specific minorities doesn't have an incentive on our side of the house that does not already exist on your side of the house. We see that this is a symmetrical damage because it's anything happening under our current system would not be happening under your current system. So we just don't agree that this point is relevant, as we have brought up at our second. So we see the main points in this debate coming down to what do the stakeholders want, what do the citizens want, what do the victims want, and what gets more guilty convictions, because we believe that this is true. So we believe that when we are identifying our main stakeholders, we're talking about the civilians living within Aotearoa, and we're talking about the victims of these crimes. So first of all, what do civilians want? The other team has provided the idea that civilians want the law. They want police to follow the law, and they don't really care about convictions when it comes to they would rather all of the police officers follow the law rather than get convictions. We would also like to argue that society is not a monolith.
people within societies will have many, many different opinions. There are some people, like at your best case scenario, there are some people who are going to care and would like rather the police follow the law than get guilty convictions. However, there are also some people who, especially like those at risk of those like the criminals who are still on our streets as a result of your system. We see that those people are the people who are going to want these people off the streets more than they are going to want like maybe a slight decrease in police violence at our worst, like a slight increase in police violence at our worst case scenario. So we believe that like yes, the like citizens do want their police to be behaving properly, but they also don't want to be in danger. We believe that like people who are murdering, people who are raping, people who are abusing children and women, those are the kind of people who they like our average citizen does not want to be meeting them on the street. They do not want to be seeing them in their life. That is not something that our average citizen wants, and we believe on our side of the house we see a chance that they can get convicted. On your side of the house we don't. So what we've discussed on our side of the house is that on our side of the house we have an incentive for victims to come forward if they are victims of a crime like this. A lot of the time women will go and consult a lawyer about a rape that they have suffered through or some sort of crime that they have suffered through, and they will say, do I have a case? And the lawyer may say, nah. Sorry mate, no case, solely because the evidence that was found, like as a result of your case, may not be admissible, in which case it is not worth the effort of taking to court. We identified that the effort of taking someone to court is incredibly high. For some people, knowing that they will likely not get a guilty conviction is not worth like all of the money and all of the suffrage of having to see that person every single day during this trial. It's just not enough to want to take them to court. Whereas we know for some victims, knowing that there is a chance of a guilty conviction would be an incentive to want to take them to court. So we see that in this case we have more victims coming forward, and even if they are not reaching guilty convictions, we can see that it is like building up a profile on this person, so that if they have later on victims, if they report that person, it means that that initial person is more likely to come to justice if that person is found guilty in one case, because that last case is more likely to be reopened or it's more likely to be reconsidered. So we see on our side of the house, we have guilty convictions. We have people getting off the streets, and we have closure for victims. We have emphasized time and time again that for victims, this is incredibly important. The other side has no benefit to victims, and they have very little benefit to civilians at their best case scenario, because we see civilians already do not trust the police if we buy into the way that our current system works, which is that there is already police brutality. There is already an incentive for police to like not really care, because the current system does not punish police who are like not behaving correctly. So we believe that this is kind of symmetrical on both sides of the house. So on our side of the house, yes, we have that sliver, which is the sliver of convictions, but we still believe that this is significant because of how significant it is to the stakeholders of our victims. On your side of the house, you remain with the status quo. You don't have any major benefit to civilians, and you have no benefit to victims. On our side of the house, at our worst case scenario, we may have like not much of a benefit to civilians, but we have like if you agree, like if you totally ignore the fact that these people are likely to like reoffend if they are not caught, and therefore likely to harm people like who are currently our civilians. However, like if you don't agree with that, if you take us at like our worst case scenario, we are still having victims, because we are either A, getting more victims to come forward, which is a net positive, or we are B, getting more guilty convictions. We believe that it is incredibly important. Someone who is going to rape, someone who is going to murder, someone who is going to harm the most vulnerable people within our society is not someone who we want harming these people in society. We see the major negative mental health detriments of having someone who violated your body out on the street there to do it to so many other people if they wish to. We see the constant fear of victims, both that they will harm someone else or that they will be harmed again. We see that they live in fear. We see that we as a society live in fear of the monsters and the shadows in the street that may be harming someone. We live in a society where we know that there are people out there like that, and I believe that the average citizen wants a guilty conviction more than they want like a slight decrease in police brutality at your best case scenario. I will now take a POI.
What benefits victims more, the punitive justice of the person who already committed that crime being in prison, or the faith that when they call the police officer, they'll be safe?
Sorry, I'm like only gonna allow you to speak for 10 seconds. I'm sorry, that was like way over. But like maybe my brain is a little bit fried, but what I'm currently just hearing is that you're asking what benefits the victims more, knowing that the person who they convicted is in jail, which can only happen on our side of the house for the record, because victims are not incentivized to come forward with these crimes on your side of the house, because of how unlikely it is that if a case is hinging on this evidence, it is likely that this evidence is the most significant part of their case. This is like something that the other teams completely ignored, saying like, oh, well, if it's like for sure that they're going to get a guilty conviction, it shouldn't really matter about this evidence. However, we say that the only circumstance in which this evidence would be used is a circumstance where the other evidence is maybe not a smoking gun. It is accurate evidence, and we can prove that. However, it is not enough for a conviction, whereas something that might be otherwise unadmissible is a smoking gun. We believe that we would only use it if it correlates with other evidence, as spoken by my first speaker. So on our side of of the house, at our worst case scenario, we have not a significant number, like not a huge increase of guilty convictions. However, any guilty conviction is still a guilty conviction that would have not happened on their side of the house. We believe that we had like a symmetrical harm when it comes to the harm to civilians as a result of police. However, we believe that we see like a major increase in like the safety of victims and the chances of the victim coming forward on our side, which is why we do believe that we have won this debate, even if only by a margin.
I thank the speaker for their speech. As is traditional, we will now reverse speaking order, so I invite the leader of the debating side to finish the team's case.
What do you need to consider when you run a prison library? Both the pros and the cons. I think we've kind of only seen one main push from the affirmative team in this debate, and that is to do with how police are going to feel like, civilians are going to feel like they don't have trust in the police, and there's going to be an increase in brutality. And I feel like at second, we clearly told you why this police brutality isn't going to exist. And then at third, we compounded this by explaining how this is just symmetrical on both sides of the house. We told you how there's high consequences for police who abuse this power. We told you why they're unlikely to do so, and we told you why this police abuse exists on both sides, because the affirmative team doesn't have that combated. So we believe it's still going to remain relatively the same. Therefore, we are not going to have that happen on our side of the house. However, even if you buy that the police are going to occasionally abuse that power, they're going to get in trouble pretty soon from doing that. But even if you don't buy that, we have unique to our side of the house that these victims of the serious crimes are going to get closure. And we told you again and again, you need to weigh these victims so highly, because these people have been through the absolute worst that a human can go through. And notice the affirmative team has kind of not responded with this. They've been relatively closure for a few victims. This is so important to victims. They've had their lives completely altered by this event. This closure and this assurance of continued safety is of paramount importance to them. And so, you can't really weigh this potential, you can't really weigh anything too much more highly than this, because we've told you how we're going to have, positive outcomes for someone who has suffered heaps. We've told you how we're going to have more chance of getting repeat offenders into prison, because people aren't going to be afraid to speak up, because they will have a case, because police have the ability to get this person arrested, get them in jail where they belong, and therefore the streets are going to be safer for people. And since we have disproven an increase in police brutality, and we have told you how this is going to have so much better outcomes for these vulnerable victims, we believe that we have won and I should go to bed.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the applicant to finish their team's case.
Long day. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think their side of the house if they win, only wins on one positive push about justice and the criminals that get captured in the status quo. I think, however, when our side of the house wins, we win on 4 main metrics that we weigh higher than their metric and give appropriate weighing to, that we haven't heard significant rebuttal to, whereas we have rebutted their point, and for their point, we actually think the metric, when we look at it holistically, actually is better on our side of the house. I'm going to explain that all when I first go into their main push that they give us. Their main push is a push around justice. They say that in the status quo there are a lot of criminals that go free that on their side of the house wouldn't. Firstly, we think that the amount of criminals was never really stated, or the way that they actually get the benefits in their side of the house was never really conferred. I think we only ever hear two ways in which this policy actually improves anything. We first hear this thing about like the vibes of some white person having a knife in their pocket, though we also hear contradictions later that they're only ever going to enact this policy if they're really, really certain when they try to rebuttal with one of their points. We think therefore this drops out of the debate. We also hear about this woman dying in a jar, but we think this probably isn't OIV. We don't think this can stand as a mechanism. Okay then, what do we respond in terms of justice? We say that there probably aren't many cases in which having a warrant or having this policy enacted would be able to significantly affect the ability to arrest someone. We do, however, talk about how we're going to face more crime, holistically. And in terms of crime, we win on the metric because we have more police brutality. That's our first main push that we get to right at the start of the debate. We explain about the incentives of police officers. We talk about how they have a power complex. We talk about how they're going to be more able to enact these things because they're going to have public pushback. I think the only thing we hear from their side of the house is that it's symmetrical on both sides and we already have police brutality. I think, however, this should weigh really, really lowly because firstly, it's at most mitigatory, but then I also don't think it actually addresses the main point in our case. I think what the main point in our case is that it goes completely unaddressed when we talk about police brutality is how we agree that most police are racist. A lot of police want to be brutal, as we stated throughout our case, but we think they have more of an ability to on our side of the house. They don't engage with any of our mechanisms about how the public is going to support them more. They don't engage with any of our mechanisms on how they're going to be able to do bad things that go against the law that then gets completely passed by. We also explain why the characterization that they're still going to be locked up doesn't work. We explain then as well that when this becomes the norm in society, it's going to continue to just get worse. We explain why governments are going to be then able to roll in more and more policies without the public backlash that they usually face. I think therefore the one of our four positive pushes that gets significant rebuttal, we still win on. But then we win on more things as well. We win on less public trust. We explain how when you don't have a trust in the system, you're not able to accrue any of their benefits because no one wants to talk to the police officers. We explain that at Max and we explain that at POI. When I said whether you're going to be able to call up the police to come to your house, what I was getting at is what we spoke about at Max, that to have a good system, and as we said at Michael, to have a good system, you need to have trust in the state. When you have less public trust, you're going to get more crime because you're not going to go to the police. I think, therefore, on their own metric of crime, we win because because ours affects all 5 million people in every single crime because people have more trust in the police, whereas their benefits only affect the certain people who, again, have already had this terrible thing happen to them. It can only ever improve their life from the perspective of giving them closure. We think crimes that are going to be stopped from happening are more important than punitive punishment for crimes that already have. We think we win this debate on their metric, and we think we win this debate by proving our metrics are more important than theirs as well. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for their speech, both teams for a good debate, and invite you to cross the floor and shake hands.
Proper done. We never have to do this again. Yeah, this week. Except for you need to see it in time. I'm not getting it next year.
I literally just struck him on that. As well you look at me, I'm just.
Right.